All right, there we go. Should be running. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody all over the world. We've got nobody else than Brad Geddes today for a great workshop about ad testing. Brad will properly introduce himself in a bit, but I'm going to try to do a little bit better because this is a little special moment for me because Brad, I don't know if you know, but you've been one of my heroes for the past couple of years, especially when I started out in Google Ads. I just showed you this book. It was actually the first book that I bought when it comes to Google Ads. It just says Google AdWords on the cover. That has changed, like you mentioned in a bit. But the theory around Google Ads as a platform still stands. But obviously a little thing here and there changed since you wrote this book. This is the third edition, I think. From what year is this, Brad? Do you still recall?
I have no idea. Last
Must be,
decade, it's
yeah,
not new.
it's not new at all,
No.
but still very nice to have. So yeah, that goes a long way back. I think I bought it somewhere 10 years ago, maybe even longer ago. So more about Brad. Brad, you've been in this industry for quite some time. I think since the internet started somewhere in 1998, and when paid search became a thing. Well, a lot of us didn't even know what paid search was back then. I saw that you've spoken around 125 conferences worldwide since
Something
you
like
started
that.
out, which
Yeah.
is crazy to me. So that's an incredible amount of conferences you spoke at and you went to. You're also the founding board member of the Paid Search Association, a big association in the USA, if I'm correct. And you're on the most influential PPC expert list around the world, which is also really cool. So today you're the founder of Ideation, and you've been running Ideation, one of the leading Google Ads monitoring, optimization, and testing platforms, a tool that I use myself as well, next to other tools. But I think you really complement other tools like TrueClicks as well in certain areas. So I like combining tools like those together. And when we wanted to host a session about ad testing, I couldn't think about anybody else than you because ad testing is what you do and what you live. So that's why you're here. And I'm really glad that you found some time in your agenda, your busy agenda to do this for us. So welcome. I'm honored to have you. And yeah, please take it away.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm Brad Geddes, and I've been doing paid search for 27 years now. So sort of seen it all, right? And when you think of ad testing, it has been around for decades. This is not new, but the implementation changes over time. It is something that's often underutilized in many accounts, especially the RSA story, which I'll get into in a second here. And when often you think of account management, you have things which are transient. They are good until you change it again. You know what? A bid is good until you change your bid again. And all the time you spent setting bids was essentially wasted, right? Because you changed it, which is why we love automated bidding now and we're not manually calculating bids all the time. Right now, when you find improvements to like ads, they often can last months or years of time as far as how things go. So they often have a much longer term increase in what you're doing. Now, the problem with ad testing is it's only as good as your ad group organization. So I'm not actually going to start with the ad testing. I'm going to start real quick with organization, because if you have a bad organization, your testing is useless, right? And this is the problem with the RSA story. So if we look at accounts a decade ago, they often had really good organization. And then Google came out with this whole story. Hey, give us your keywords, give us your assets, throw it all together, and we'll render ads for you. And we saw a lot of accounts actually get much worse organization. So like this is a company, they're a hotel in New York City, and what they're known for is being pet friendly. Hey, want to travel with your dog or your cat and you want to be in New York City, this is a great place to stay. So they have keywords, NYC dog friendly hotel, Times Square hotel, etc. And of course, they have ads like dog-friendly hotel. Hey, they are by Times Square. They're near Javits Center. It's a big event place. So here you go, Google, take our stuff. Now, the problem is Google says we look at this query, we look at your assets, and we build an ad. But if we look closely, we see that the keyword, right, dog-friendly hotel, has been shown 19,000 times. The asset matching that is 4,000. In fact, most people searching dog-friendly actually see downtown New York hotel. And you just lost that one critical piece that makes them stand out and what's different, right? And so, we talked to them and said, hey, go fix your organization, basically. And they took that one ad group, they made it a lot of different ad groups, right? And this simple statement, right, change increased their overall conversion rates and click-through rates almost, in some cases, their conversion rates went up 4 times, right? It's a huge difference because you're now making sure your ads, landing pages, and keywords match each other. Now, I know this is basic, right? This is the essential part of any setup. But if you don't have this right, then your ad testing often falls down. And it's often why we see weird RSA assets get displayed too, right? So simple flow chart of, how to sort of organize ad groups. Now, if you're ever struggling with ad group organization, actually ad relevance is an amazing tool to use because Google actually tells you, right, this ad and keyword can't work well together. And if you're ever thinking, hey, should we move stuff around? Just looking at your quality score ad relevance factor can tell you a lot about how you're organizing things and what can be done. Now, beyond that, right, once we have a good organization in place, then we think about our ad components we're going to get into before testing. So I'm going to use the word relevancy headline a lot, right? Relevancy headline just means someone did a search and the ad at least matches what they searched for. And unfortunately, you'll see a lot of ads. This is dishwasher replacements. And the second ad from a very large company says same day, next day. Doesn't mention what the keyword is, right? This is a $10 to $20 click. Jeep Wrangler car insurance. And only one ad mentions Jeep. And these are all giant companies, right? And this is number one. Do your ads even talk about what someone wants? Number two, features and benefits. Features are bullet point lists of true facts about a product. A benefit is why it makes it useful. So something's got a 9-hour battery. What does that mean? Right? Hey, you can carry around your computer around the office all day without hunting for a plug. Right? That's actually something useful as opposed to a 9-hour battery. Now, when we think of something as simple as features versus benefits, right, we have to, before we decide what to use in an ad, we actually have to think about where someone is in the consideration stage of the funnel. So to me, Google Ads is not a channel. Google Ads is really about 20 channels in one, right? Because a brand keyword versus a buy keyword versus a product ad versus a display ad are different funnel reaches. So if we think of where's this ad meeting someone in the funnel, we can go back and say, should we focus on features or benefits? If they don't know who you are, then you have to say why this is useful. We comparison shop on features. Are you buying a new computer? You're going to say, how much RAM do you want? What's the screen size? What's the battery life? Those are just features. They're true facts. We buy because of what something does for us. Right now, our next component is our CTA. Unfortunately, the vast majority of calls to action on the entire web are terrible. In fact, many are pre-written by Google, right? Subscribe now, buy now, shop now. You know what? You don't even read the words anymore, right? You basically just ignore them. We're blind to a lot of these words these days. So with calls to action, it's not about saying what to do, right? It's about saying, what do you get out of us saying do this item? Right. So, I mean, one of my favorites was this company. They're a nonprofit volunteer company. And they had this ad, donate your time today. And it did terrible. And they changed the line to be help humanity volunteer today. And this was a huge impact by like, hey, just help your fellow person. And suddenly they get a lot more voluntary hours from something simple. So it's not about just, hey, buy now, shop now. Shop now for why? What do you get out of going to this place's, site and spending money? But with calls to action, we have to also think back to the buying cycle. Because if someone doesn't know who you are, you can't say buy now. But if they're actually shopping and they say, I'm looking to buy this product, then you want to match where they are in the funnel. So if they're, they don't know much, right? That's that soft CTA: discover, learn, find out how. Then you move to some actions, right? Where you're often maybe content gating some PDFs or ebooks and say, well, now you can download or, find this. And then when it's ready they're at the end of the funnel, right? Schedule a demo, buy, call us, etc. So if someone's further down the funnel, right, and you put in discover and they're ready to buy, you've left money on the table because you're not matching where they are because they're actually ready to take action. So often I want to think, where do they sit? Now, there's a whole lot more we could get into, and I don't want to spend forever on this because we could talk about pain points. What are you solving? Authority statements can be huge. If there's 20 options on a page, why are you the one they should pick? Right? We haven't mentioned FOMO. We got fear of missing out or savings, emotions. So there's a lot of other pieces here. And these are things to think about when you're just creating your assets, thinking, how do we want to speak to users, right? What do they need to know? What's our brand message? Where are they in that funnel to match our brand message to put this out there? So now when we think about assembling our ads, right? Number one is when you're adding assets, are you using roughly equal numbers of various types? So if you have 10 assets related to the ad group and you have 3 calls to action, most of your ads are just going to be duplicates of related to the ad group. If you have 8 calls to action and 2 relevancy lines, you'll see ads that are just call to action, which don't make any sense to users. So one of the issues, and Google actually made a change to how they rendered ads because of this, was a lot of people had very similar assets and too many assets of one type. And you know what happens when an ad shows 3 calls to action and 3 headlines? No one knows what to do because that just is overly aggressive. So that's where Google last year, the year before, made it so an ad can only show 1 headline. And this helped many people because instead of showing feature, they could just say 1 feature and headline and not duplicate lines. So when Google went to only showing 1 headline, it was in reaction to how poorly many ads were actually made. Now, some people have fantastic ads, right? But when you look across the board, there's just a lot of bad combinations. So we have our assets, and we say, let's use a mixture, which could be authority statements, calls to action, relevancy lines, so forth. Then next, we have to make this decision, do we pin? And with pinning, I just want to make sure that with pinning, you're telling Google, I want this asset in this particular position, but you could put multiple assets in a same pin position. See, in this second example, we have 2 lines pinned to position 1. So Google can switch back and forth. You could have 5 lines pinned to position 1. So you're telling Google, you know what? We know from years of data, headline 1 works best when it's related to keywords in the ad group. Headline 2 works best when it's a feature, an emotional appeal, a call to action. So we don't need you to go through all this math to do that combination when we know that's actually how I want the ads rendered. So pinning speeds up this process, but you can pin more than 1 asset to a line. Now, when you don't pin and you don't have a lot of data, what you end up with are ads that just repeat themselves because Google defaults to relevancy when they don't know better, meaning they're going to pick lines that match your keywords. And this company doesn't have a lot of data. Like these are often 20 impressions, 50 impressions, or a dry cleaner. And ads saying wedding gown preservation, wedding dress preservation over and over again doesn't do anything. It's not because they have bad assets. In fact, they have some very good assets. Trusted, they're over 100 years old. right? They pick up and deliver for free, which is a dry cleaner who comes to your business, grabs your dry cleaning, takes it with them and delivers it back to you. That's awesome. Google had shown those lines a total of once. When those lines were in their ETAs, their conversion rates were almost 3.5 times higher. So this is where pinning is very useful, because you're telling Google, this is what really matters to our users. Now, the other reason we pin, it's a math problem. So if you have 15 unpinned headlines, that's almost 3,000 combinations. If we also have 4 unpinned descriptions, that makes 50,000 combinations. Now, if we pin 3 lines to headline 1, and we have 12 more unpinned assets, that makes 435 headline combinations. We pin 3 headlines to headline 1 and 2, that's 93. So what we're doing is we're increasing data density, right, of how much data Google really has to understand what works within our framework to render ads better. Now, it's hard to visualize 50,000 combinations. So instead, let's talk about time. If you have 15 unpinned headlines and you have 4 unpinned descriptions, and you have an ad group with 10,000 impressions a month, which is a decent, healthy number of impressions per month for an ad group. And Google likes 100. 100 is really their magic number for making decisions. And you want 100 impressions for each of those potential renderings. That would take 41 years to accomplish, right? So, I mean, you're obviously not going to ad test. If you added a second ad, you're talking 82 years. Clearly, having an ad test done in the next century is not going to be useful for you, right? So then we say, well, how much time do we have based on our impressions? So if we had 100,000 impressions a month, then you know what? If we pin 5 lines to headline 1 and 5 lines to headline 2, and we had 10 times this data, we would actually have a nice combination in about a month and a half, right? So when we're thinking about how much do we want to pin, it's a math equation in the end, right? It's saying how much data do we need to really get this information. And this is why, in most places, pinning 3 to 5 lines to headline 1 and 2 has enough data per ad group to get results, but you're still giving Google some freedom, right? Because hey, they have 5 headlines and 5 descriptions. They have some freedom to serve and find combinations. But hey, we want, relevancy in headline 1. Maybe we'll add some authority statements and calls to action to headline 2, and then we'll kind of let Google play with 3, right? And that's where you can have some control, but still use machine learning. Now, the other aspect, I'm going to get Katie to ad strength in a moment because it is a useless metric, but we'll cover ad strength in a second. I saw the comment pop up. So the second part of this is site links. This is Somer talked about. So Google can take 2 of your assets and turn them into site links. When Google takes an asset from an ad and makes it a site link, the clicks on that asset go to the same landing page as your ad. So now we have to think about this a little bit, right? So some companies are like, we have a very small website and we're often just randomly making up stuff for site links, so they have to go to different pages. Well, suddenly having 3 links that go to 1 page, that's great, right? Now we don't have to think about as much of this. Others, like, hey, I actually have a very strong site link strategy, and we need to use our site links to send people to the right places because our website's massive. We don't want Google to turn our assets into site links because we want that variety. So this is much more of your strategic level of site links. Now, in this ad, we've got 6 lines made, just a random number. 2 are pinned. 1 has to be a headline 1. So of the other 3 headlines left, 2 of them can turn into site links. Now, if we want, hey, you know what? We like this idea of more assets being turned into site links. We can take an ad like this, and we've pinned 2 lines to 1, 2 lines to 2, and 1 line to 3. But we have 4 more assets. Those assets can only be site links. So there are interesting ways to use extra unpinned assets as sitelinks. Or you might say, you know what, we actually don't want Google to use our assets as sitelinks because we need this. So if we just say pin in any position to these lines, then Google honors pinning. They cannot become a sitelink. So anything pinned can't turn into a sitelink. So often pinning is as much about sitelinks as it is also about ad control. Regarding ad strength, so pinning reduces ad strength. You're absolutely right. Ad strength does not affect quality score. It does not affect ad rank. It does not affect your eligibility for the auction. In fact, we've done a lot of research on this, and we're actually refreshing our research right now. Lower ad strength ads traditionally have better click-through rates and conversion rates than high ad strength ads. Now, if you think about it, it's actually the math, goes back to the math problem. If you have 15 headlines and 4 descriptions, that's 50,000 combinations. So it takes forever for Google to figure this out. If we pin a few things, yes, we have a lower ad strength, but then suddenly there's better data density and Google serves it better. So often lower ad strength is better metrics. Now, there's a couple things to note. One, if you have 2 ads in an ad group with different ad strengths, the higher ad strength usually, but not always, gets more impressions because Google thinks it's better, right? But it doesn't affect your ability to be in the auction. Second, if the reason you see you have a low ad strength is because you have the include popular keywords in your headlines, this is often an indication you have too many keywords for your current assets and they're just not relevant enough, or you really haven't made some lines that really encompass the keywords. So, and it could be one of those weird situations where, you know, lawyer, attorney, barista, et cetera, are very similar terms, but they're technically different, right? And Google sometimes does weird things with small word variations. If you see, make your headlines more unique and you are not pinning, that usually says you have just too many similar ads and you want to change things up a bit more. But if you see, you know, include popular keywords in your headlines is checked and you're pinning a lot and you have a strategy, the rest does not matter. So they are good suggestions, especially the include popular keywords, because that usually says you don't have good relevancy lines or you have too many keywords in your ad group for this particular asset type. All right, so the hardest thing for marketers in many cases is to get good ad ideas. And it's not because we're not creative, it's because in many cases, you are the only person in your company managing search, and you don't have someone to bounce ideas off of. Or you're an agency and you're on the B2B side and everyone else is business to consumer, right? And so it's hard to bounce ideas off of them. So this is where, you know, LLMs, I'm not a fan of them managing accounts, but they're great for ideas, right? Something simple like, here's my keywords, here's my landing page, here's the language, right? Write the ad in the same language as the keywords. Create this for me. This is a very simple prompt. This is actually one of my favorites, which it's much longer. So there's a link to download this because it's you can't fit it on a screen. But this will make about 45 headlines, right? It'll make emotional headlines, it'll make CCAs, etc. These are not copy and paste for most people. These are get ideas, wordsmith, use. But if you're looking for a large variety of ideas, then LLMs are great for this. Now, where you can have some fun, right, is add additional rules to a script like I put in there. Like, hey, make headlines that rhyme, or use business language because it's for C-level execs, or make the ads more playful if you're doing, you know, kids' toys and so forth. So, you know, there's a lot of ways you can use just a few words and get very different lines out. Now, if you write some lines and you really don't like how the ads were generated, or they didn't fit your business, how you want to be portrayed, save them. Google is slowly rolling out this is how auto-created assets, the rules they should follow, right? Which will be boxes you can write in some text that tell Gemini, don't go this direction. Those lines you wrote that you did not like the results are actually going to be great lines to paste into the auto generation guidelines of saying, don't write ads this way for us. So there's actually some good stuff to save to use when those get fully rolled out for asset creation. All right, so let's move to ad testing. So there's two types of ad testing. One is single ad group testing. We put some ads in an ad group and we say what's best. A lot of times people ask, well, if we're giving Google assets and we're giving Google data, they're making the ads, do we still need the ad test? Absolutely. This ad group, single ad group, spends about $1 million a month. This is 60 days of data. And if we look at impressions, Google has served the ad with the lowest click-through rate, the lowest conversion rate, and the lowest conversion per impression the most. The pause button got this company about a little more than 300 more conversions per month by just pausing the middle ad, right? And just because Google has the data does not mean they always use it properly. And it's not uncommon to see Google show the worst ad the most. And this is also a really unusual one because our highest ad strength ad, the bottom one, has by far the least amount of impressions, right? So Google's not even serving the highest ad strength the most. These types of examples are super easy for us to find. It's not that this is an exception. They're incredibly common, right? And this is just from ad analysis. This is from our software. So we definitely want to test. The question is, do we test within an ad group or do we do ad group aggregation where you have those bigger question words? Like every time a big brand comes on and you look in their ads, they've got their brand name in every ad, even for non-branded products. Like, you know, you should run a simple test of looking at your non-brand keywords, making one ad branded and one ad non-branded, and see which does best. Now, when you think of a test like that, they don't want to know this in an ad group, right? They may have tens, hundreds, thousands of ad groups. They want to know this. So often with multi-ad group testing, we're thinking about an idea and rendering it across large numbers of ad groups, then re-aggregating that data. So when we think of testing, right, we can do unpinned versus unpinned. Unless you have a crazy amount of data, you will never get a good result here, right? Because if you have 10,000 impressions a month, we're talking, again, decades to actually get statistical significance. Now, you'll get statistical significance, but half your assets will barely get impressions. We can do unpinned versus pinned. Now, this is often a verification type test where you give Google some assets unpinned, or you take what you've had running and you look at the top few renderings, you know, that Google has of what ads they've served the most. And you take those and you make them pinned ads. And you say, okay, Google, you're serving this one the most. Why? Is it actually better than the others? Is it worse? Did you find some lines we didn't realize? Or was this randomness? And that kind of is a verify what Google has done. The most common test by far is what I often call theme testing, right? Ad 1 is discounts. Ad 2 is prices. Ad 3 is shipping. Or ad 1 is call to action. Ad 2 is authority statements. Should we focus on CTAs or authority? Right? By far the most common test run is just here's a few higher level ideas. Should we care about our ratings and reviews or downloading a white paper? What really matters to our metrics? Now, if we have this idea, right, which we're often pinning that in a headline, we might pin other headlines too, right, which is fine. And if we have that idea, how do we want to test it, right? We could say, I want to know this in one ad group, which is single ad group testing, right? Good for insights for those keywords. You have really high traffic ad groups. You have ad groups your boss watches every day to say, why is our ad not running for this keyword? You often want to really control what those ads look like, right? And then we have our multi, which is saying we want to know for all of our non-brand, should we put geographies or not geographies in our ads? Should we localize them or not, right? How does that matter? And that's often your sort of bigger market research questions. So if you have the big questions, right? Does quality matter? Does shipping matter? We often see in B2B e-commerce that rush shipping is more important than free. They'll pay for it, they want it tomorrow. Where in B2C e-commerce, it's the opposite, right? So that's often a good test in business lines. If you're doing multi-ad group testing, then you need a key to look up your data, which right now is labels. It's going to shortly change to being assets, and I'll get to that in a second. So like in this case, there are a installation company, and they wanted to know if we match price to the person's experience level, does that make a difference, right? So if we say, hey, get an apprentice, which is an official title, then it's cheap, versus master craftsman will come out, but they're really expensive. And it turns out people are willing to pay for the best, right? And that's what this company learned out as far as how their ads go. So you have your ideas, you know, do you want to test this in one ad group or multiples? And then we need to set up our tests. Now, the most common testing metric people use is click-through rate, which I test, and I'll get to why in a second. It's by far the most common metric. Number 2 is conversion rate. Now, the problem with conversion rate is it ignores how many clicks you get in the first place, right? So let's say I have an ad 1, well, I'm going to use simple numbers. Ad 1 is a 10% click-through rate and a 10% conversion rate, okay? Ad 2 is a 3% click-through rate, but a 23% conversion rate. Which one's actually better? The one that's a good click-through rate and good conversion rate, or a really bad click-through rate, but a really good conversion rate? We have mixed metrics, right? And so when I think of testing, I think of the impression. When your ad is displayed, you have a chance of a conversion, right? You're right. You haven't chose a keyword, someone searched for a keyword, your ad has a chance of a conversion. Now, in B2B, we might be doing things like pre-qualifying users and saying, don't click my ad if you're not this, or your luxury travel, you know, our packages start at 10,000. So there are times that everyone's actually, you know, potential conversion, but we still want to say, here's our opportunity is an impression. So then for lead gen, as opposed to conversion rate, we're often thinking of conversion per impression. Hey, I had this many impressions, I got this many conversions. Now, which combination of click-through rate and conversion rate gets me the most potential customers, right? So this is simple math. I mean, this is conversion divided by impressions. It's not a difficult formula to do, but it takes click-through rate and conversion rate into an account. Now, this is great on lead gen, but as soon as you have variable checkout amounts or you're tracking ROAS, this fails. So on the e-commerce side, we can do the same thing, right? We could say, what is our either revenue? If we have profit, we could use profit. This sort of depends on how you pass data back to Google. We could say revenue divided by impressions or revenue minus cost divided by impressions. When ad 1 is served, I make 33 cents. Or sorry, when ad 1 is served, I make 46 cents. When ad 2 is served, I make 33. I'd rather make 46 cents an impression than 33. That's a winner, right? So again, we're not doing complicated math. We're just instead saying, let's look at the impression opportunity as opposed to the click opportunity in how we measure success. So then what we're thinking about is, what should we use? Well, if we want the most conversions, it's conversion per impression. Now, there are companies who are just saying, I want the most people possible, right? Just click on my ad, then that would be CTR. If you're really struggling with quality scores, right, then CTR is a fantastic tiebreaker. You have 2 ads really close in conversion per impression. One has a much better click-through rate. The better click-through rate will give you more audience people, will give you more people for remarketing, right? So that one it's often a fantastic tiebreaker metric, right? Now, in some cases, we may have filtering metrics where, you know, there's an edict from the company that says, you can't go over a $30 CPA. Well, if ad 1 is 35 and ad 2 is 25, ad 1 can't ever actually be a winner. It's above our metrics. So it can't be a winner. We have to choose maybe the lower CPI because it fits the goals. Now, next, we often want to define minimum data, right? And this is where it's an essential process to say, we don't want to look at results until we have at least X amount of information. because Google will start to make decisions within 100 impressions. But if you ever run statistical significance and you say, what is this ad test at 100 impressions versus 1,000? It's often significantly different, because statistical significance has this assumption that data that came before will be data like the data that comes later. Except when we look at paid search, your keyword being searched on a Monday morning versus a Wednesday night versus a Friday afternoon have different sort of intents from users to them. So we often want to look at larger time frames. Now, there is no number that says this is what you should use for minimums. Because you know what? If you're Expedia and you probably want 100,000 impressions for your brand. If you're, my small regional travel agency, then you might not get 100,000 impressions a year. So you might need to use a much lower number. So there is no one number. What you should keep in mind is if one person makes a significant difference on your data, it's not enough. So if I have one conversion on 100 clicks, I have a 1%. If the next person converts, I went from a 1% conversion rate to a 1.98%. I doubled my numbers in one person. That's not enough, right? So we often want to define those minimums. A lot of companies do monthly ad testing. That's great. You know what? It's 4 weeks. It's often a couple sales cycles. That's a great way of doing it. Doing a test on Monday and finishing it Wednesday usually is a very not enough data, regardless of how much impressions you have. Next, we have our confidence levels or statistical significance, which is just the percentage chance something is not due to randomness. That's all it really means. But if you have an 80% confidence, just means 20% of the results are random. So some companies who are really small will go to 80% confidence, but you're saying 20% of our ad tests are due to randomness, not actual data. So usually 90% is the lowest most people want to go. And then you've got, third-party brands you sell. You might go to 95. For your branded terms, often 95 to 99, depending on how much it's searched, right? But essentially, what's your tolerance? What's your percentage chance you will pick a winner because of randomness versus actual data? That's what you're deciding when you pick out your confidence levels. So then when we think about actions, right, it's real simple. You make an ad test, you've got 2 ads in an ad group, or 2 ads in 50 ad groups, you're aggregating data. So you say, if we're below minimum data, we wait. If we're above minimum data, we calculate confidence factors. If we're below, we wait. If we're above, we take action, right? And then if we're above max data, we actually set a cap to say, if we don't have a result in 3 months or this much data, we also take action. Action is just pausing a loser or creating a new ad. Now, do not do this by hand. Use a script, use a tool, do something. This is what happens when most people sit down to do ad testing when they're running results in like Excel. Week 1, they sit down and they make 100 ad tests, and they're great. And they wait a couple weeks, and so after a couple weeks, they go and they download data, run statistical significance, and they have one winner. Like, I just sat there and downloaded data and uploaded it here and ran all these formulas, and I have one thing to do. So they do the same thing the next week, and there's 3 things to do. And after a couple months, they've made 9 decisions, and they spent all this time setting up and like, you know what, this one looks better than that one, just pause. This one looks better. And as humans, we will find a pattern in anything. We're amazing at finding patterns in absolute randomness, right? So as soon as you say, well, that one looks better, you've lost the way. You will make bad decisions. So whether it's a script added to ChatGPT, our software does this too. Don't do it by hand, because you will find it gets so boring and tedious, you will make bad decisions. Now, the other way to get some really cool insights into data, right, is by looking at Google has now put out there, this is your actual data by asset. So you can now go and see, hey, this asset is used in 11 ads, and here's its aggregate data. Right, here's its click-through rate, its conversion rate. This line's in 57 ads. So we have this. Now, if you have a large account, staring at 3,000 lines of this will not get you any insights, because you're just staring at so much data. This is useful. So what I've done here is I took my RSA data, I downloaded it, I added it to, in this case, ChatGPT with a script that said, turn this into n-grams. And if you don't know n-grams, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 word patterns across your data, right, across all your ads. And then I can download it and add conditional formatting. So instead of looking at this huge thing, I can say, hey, this row, this line, this pattern is in 131 ads. And when it shows up, I have a really low CPA. You know what? I should take a note of that. Or this line's used in 91 ads. When I use this, my conversion per impression is amazing compared to other places. Now, like this was a senior living center. So they have, independent living, assisted living, Alzheimer's care, etc. And senior living centers can be really expensive. So they had a lot of assets focused on price, insurance, government funding, and so forth. Right. And then they had, some ads that were based on calls to action, like schedule a weekend visit, come see us, talk to other residents, etc. Then they had some assets that had reviews, ratings, and even quotes from like residents or family members. And they're like, this is a pretty good mixture. Now, when we looked at the n-gram data for this account, it turned out that when they were talking about prices, their click-through rates, conversion rates, and ROAS were significantly below the norm. They're actually really bad. When they looked at their calls to action of come visit us, it was about average for the campaign. When they showed ratings, reviews, and quotes, their data was amazing, right? And they realized a lot of people searching for them weren't as price sensitive as they thought. What they'd heard is a lot of horror stories about senior living, and they really cared about the reviews and ratings, right? So they said, well, this is it's our RSA data. This was not a true ad test. We took, our non-branded account and ran this. So now let's make an ad test. Let's do one where we take our headlines, we pin it to headline 1 related to, the keyword someone searched for, all-timer versus independent, etc. Let's take headline 2 and let's make, one set of assets that is, 5,000 4.9 plus star ratings. We've been in business for 50 something years. One set on authority statements and ratings, and then another set on the calls to action. Come spend the weekend for free with us, right? See what it's all about. And then they ran this in a couple hundred ad groups, right, to see which one really does make a difference overall. And it turned out that for 85% of their ad groups or something, the ratings really, really mattered. And there were a few groups like the Alzheimer's group that they come visit and actually spend time really mattered in some very small subsections. But now they have this information, so you completely redesign how they were speaking to people, and they realized that things like pricing and insurance were good site links because people cared, but they weren't the main focus of the ads, right? And that's the kind of insights you can pull from this. Again, this isn't hard to do, and this is also going to be in PPC Hub where you can download your RSA data. There's a prompt you can use, and then just add conditional formatting, the color scales across the lines. You have some interesting data to go look at, right? So there's a way to pull insights, especially if you haven't done a lot of ad testing, but you have a lot of assets, and you can sort of learn how things have gone so far to give you ideas on what to do. All right, so when we think about ad testing as a whole, we start the brainstorm. What do we want to know? What are our assumptions about people? What do they think they want? Or what does our boss say we have to use? And let's see if that's actually good or not, right? Whatever it happens to be. And then, we say, how do you pick winners and losers? What's our winning metric, our confidence levels we want, our data, etc. We set up our tests. Now, we may use some of the LLM scripts to get some ideas for the test, which is great, right? And then, right, we look at our test results, and then we can make analysis to say, how does this really work? What is best? And in some companies, depending on what you're testing, you might pass this to other teams. So for instance, we often see, we'll have SEOs test ads for click-through rate because your ad title is similar to your headline title that gets your headline that gets shown in the SERP results. We'll see others that are testing short calls to action because they want to know what button to use in the email they send out, because an email button, right, is the same, or a button in your email is the same whether it's in a display ad versus it's on an email. And so there's a lot of other ways you can also use this data. I mean, when people went to bookstores a whole lot, which they still exist, just not as used as much, we had publishers who would test ads before they named books, because a click-through rate of an ad, it turned out was relevant to the pull rate off a shelf of someone looking at a book, right? So when you're looking at sort of market research, there's a lot of stuff you can pull from your ad metrics, because this is what people care about. Let's say what they want, right? I mean, and it's even called an ad group, because the ads first, that's what someone sees. The keywords just say show an ad or don't show an ad, right? It's Google Ads, ad first. Ads are your marketing, your connection point to users. Everything else just says, should I show an ad or not, and how much should I pay for it? Right? That's all every other thing says. The ad is the part that actually talks to someone and says, hi, we're so-and-so, right? We can help you with this. Come be our next customer, right? That's the ad part. Everything else is just supporting metrics for how the ad's displayed. If you are looking, we've been running software for years. We love ads. We love all kinds of making life efficient. We offer a 30-day free trial ad analysis. So if you are looking at being more efficient in how you manage things or insights, come, give us a trial too. And with that, let's move to some questions and thoughts from everybody.
Thank you so much, Brad. That was really insightful. Do you have time for a couple of questions until 4 maybe?
Oh yeah, let's go for it. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. So I saw one question in the chat already from Katie. Katie, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question yourself, or should I repeat it? I'm not sure if you can unmute yourself. Okay, no worries. So Katie basically asked, pinning reduces ad strength, and my manager thinks ad strength affects quality score / ad rank. How can we challenge these types of beliefs?
How can we challenge these beliefs? That's education. That's why you're here, right? And even so, Google even put out so this is such a common misconception. Google, I believe on their ad strength page, and maybe on their quality score page, in their help files, even made a notation that ad strength does not affect quality score. And Jenny Marvin, who is the Google Ads liaison, has even put up posts on like LinkedIn telling people these are not connected metrics. But it is, I mean, users thinking that ad strength affects ad rank or quality score, it's so common a misconception that, there's even official words from Google on this one.
Yeah, so just sending over that particular support article would end the discussion, hopefully.
Hopefully.
And otherwise, you would need to bring some data. So a question that I have, Brad. So you mentioned some data poverty problems earlier on your presentation, where you showed that 15 unpinned headlines and 10,000 impressions per month, it would take up to 2.5 years for each headline combination to get 100 impressions, which is insane. You can obviously pin or partially pin, but you can also limit the amount of assets, like limit the amount of headlines and description lines purposely to increase data density, obviously. Yep. What do you recommend and why? Do you often choose between one of the two tactics, or do you sometimes even combine them?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So in fact, let's go put that slide up, because I think, right, so my preferences, right? If it is let's call it a mid-sized account, you have some decent amount of data, but you don't have brand ad groups that are getting 20, 30,000 impressions a month. Your ad groups are getting 1 to 5,000 impressions a month. So then I'm gonna probably pin 3 lines to headline 1 and 3 lines to headline 2. Headline 3 is more about that site link strategy, right? But I'll probably just add 3 more assets. So I've got 9 assets. Google's got 27 headline combinations. It's actually a little bit more to play with, and that's a good starting place. Now, if I am a larger brand and I get a lot of data, then I might increase the number of headlines I'm pinning. Might, but in many cases, trying to think of 5 good calls to action, right? When they all do the same thing, download this paper, is sometimes really hard to come up with some ideas, right? So sometimes I might still be at 3 or 4 because the others are just kind of like repeating themselves. They don't add anything new. Authority statements, I think, are the easiest ones to have 5 or 6 good ideas to do things. So, with larger brands, you're often going to be in that 3 to 5 range. Smaller brands 2 to 3. And there are times you might only do 1. That's often when it is a specific brand message. You're matching a TV commercial you did, and it really needs to be matching, offline assets or something. But I'm usually going to be in the smaller number for that.
Makes sense.
And then rarely do I use all 15. In fact, it's actually pretty rare I use all 15.
Yeah, same over here. And I think more and more people are starting to reduce their amount of assets within the RSAs. Especially now, you can also aggregate the data on the asset level, which is extremely helpful. I'm so happy Google pulled that one off. So when it comes down to the pinning strategy and testing with partially pinning, fully pinning, etc., where do you start? Because you can test multiple things like you showed in your presentation: unpinned versus fully pinned, unpinned versus partially pinned versus partially pinned. I think for a lot of advertisers, it's hard to know where to start. Do you start quite aggressively?
No.
For example, from a fully unpinned situation to a fully pinned situation? Or do you start testing the waters a little bit and do things slowly?
So I have gotten to the point that even crazy sized accounts. So pull this up here a second. So this account is using 12 unpinned headlines per asset. Now they're getting over 100,000 impressions, right? This is 2 months of data. And this is a big number, right? That's a giant number of impressions, and Google's still not getting it right. I've gotten to the point I rarely start an ad that doesn't have some pinning involved. Now, I wouldn't have said this a couple of years ago, but I've just after seeing so much, my default is 3 lines pinned to headline 1, 3 lines pinned to headline 2, headline 3 pinning versus not being a Sitelinks strategy. And I'm usually, so headline 1 being related to ad group is just, it's worked for 20 years, right? That's not magic. So I might even use the same ones in both ads I start. What I really want to know initially is what makes the difference to consumers. So I'm usually going to start with that more theme testing of, is this price sensitivity? Do I need to care about, shipping? Or if it's a headline 1, it may be like geographies, like an insurance. Do I need to add the location to the ads for insurance or something like that? If it's, travel, are we talking it's cheap travel, therefore price sensitivity matters? Is it a large brand, therefore loyalty matters? Is it a place that concierge service matters more? So I'm more likely to sort of sit back and say, what's worked for you before, what hasn't worked for you before, but not believe those completely, right? That's just kind of ideas. And start with that theme testing of, let's just figure out this high level stuff first of how things go, which is generally more of a headline 2 test in most cases.
And let's say you're completely new to ad testing and you haven't done any of this before. Do you see like a hierarchy in which component types of what type of angles or even sub angles tend to win most often? Or is it really industry specific?
Yeah, so generally benefit statements and calls to action usually win more than anything else. Because benefits like that, what's the consumer actually get out of it? And when you can combine benefits with emotional appeals, with pre-qualification or something, that really does well, right? If you can sort of combine a couple ideas together. That being said, like authority statements sometimes are the winners and so forth. So I really want to know initially, what's the bigger picture focus? What should it be, right, on those types of ads? And so I'm going to start often much more with a multi-ad group sort of testing approach, where my headline ones are probably going to be the same in 2, potentially even 3 ads, depending on how much data the company gets. And then headline or ad 1 has 3 discount statements, and headline 2 has 3, or ad 2 has 3 calls to action of different types, and ad 3 is 3 authority statements, whatever it is. And get that initial idea of which one of these is best, middle, worst, or maybe there's 2 best to 1 worst, right? But what does that look like initially before I refine more?
Yeah, so basically big picture first, and
It is.
then yeah.
And when you think big picture, it's not account wide, right? It is. So I love labels so much, campaign labels of like, this is brand, this is non-brand, this is third party brands, this is competitors, right? This is just playing stuff. And I'm not going to look at RSAs account wide. I'm going to look at them by those segments only.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. I've got one last question. I've got more, but I want to respect your time. And it revolves around the future of ad testing, because we've seen Google messing up a lot of our otherwise clean tests with introducing stuff like AI Max. So obviously, clean ad testing requires, well, a lot of controlled variables and clean data, right, to properly test with. How do you see a future of systematic ad testing in a world where Google keeps taking away controls and keep, well, messing up, well, where certain keywords are being triggered, stuff like that?
Yeah, AI Max is interesting in that. So I think as a conceptual level, ad testing is going nowhere. There are too many brands who care about their message, and you know what? You start messing with BMW's classic statements and so forth. BMW gets mad and they spend a lot of money, right? So like you have brands that have spent decades and sometimes over a century, right? Like refining their brand message. So it's going to stay there. Now, things like AI Max are interesting because you've got, really 3 components, right? One is the keyword expansion, which is the default, right? And that's where ads can suddenly show from different ad groups and so forth. I think there's potential world there, and I'll cover that in a second, right? If we go like 3 minutes over here. 2 is, do I let AI Max write assets, right? Or do I let PMax write assets? And right now, I believe their assets are terrible. And in fact, ad strength, not ad strength, quality, right? Your asset quality, where it'll say, hey, this quality is low, above average, whatever. Google will not rate their own. Have you ever noticed that, right? Like you can get a low, but Google can't get a low. They won't rate their own created ones. To the fact, I've heard rumors recently that Google's going to deprecate and remove that metric now that they're showing stats by asset, which is great.
Yeah.
My real hope for things like that auto creation on AI Max is, if I've got 1,000 ad groups, writing callouts and site links for 1,000 ad groups is grunt work. It's terrible work, but it really can help. If AI Max can go through and get it 80% right and I can just clean it up, boy, that is so useful. So my hope actually on some of those things, I wish I could say AI Max, write my extension / assets, but don't write my ads, right? Because I think that's incredibly useful for some of these things. The ad testing is getting it messy at times, and it will. Authority statements within a campaign, because AI Max is ad group or campaign level. Authority statements, calls to action are often similar across ad groups. That part's okay. It's them messing up the headline ones, which definitely cause some issues, because suddenly you're saying A, the consumer searches for B, and it's problematic. And right now it's not a big number. If that number increases, then we may have to make some adjustments to how we read the data, or try to look at the AI Max impressions and toss them out of ad testing. We're not there yet. It doesn't do this enough, but that's a potential change too. But I think as a whole, ad testing is going nowhere. This is been an evergreen I mean, the first ad was written in ancient Egypt like 5,000 years ago, right? Or maybe 3,000 years ago. I actually looked this up once, right? Like, when was the first ad? It's ancient Egypt, and it was, I forget, someone who did something at their house, right? Wrote it on a cave. And
I
so
wonder if they did ad testing
I
5,000 years
don't
ago
think
as
so,
well.
because I don't think when you're writing rocks, you want to go and try to erase your engraving, right? But I mean, we're talking thousands of years, right? So yeah, ad testing didn't become bigger till a few centuries ago. But no, I don't think it's going anywhere. Just the way
Yeah.
we do it may change some.
Yeah. Great stuff. So Brad, once again, I want to respect your time. Thank you so much for doing this for all of us. If people want to learn more, or maybe perhaps want to start a trial for your software, where do they need to go?
So if you go to, whoops, I just scrolled way too far. If you go to adanalysis.com, right, you'll see it, and then you can click a free trial button. If you want to see, I post a lot. LinkedIn is the only social platform I actually spend any time on these days. So if you're looking for me, you search my name at LinkedIn and you'll find me. And you know, I don't post all the time, but when I do, I try to be more interesting and insightful than random news.
Yeah, you are, especially with the large case studies you did lately, which is amazing, by the way.
Excellent. Glad you like them.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I hope to talk to you soon, Brad.
Excellent. Thank you, and thanks everyone for being here. Enjoy.
See ya. Have a nice day, everybody.